Anna, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bijan. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Nadia, and thank you to the team for welcoming me to this presentation. As Nadia said, I am actually a pediatric nurse by background, and I hope that this very quick presentation will give you a small snap example of how things work here in the UK in terms of the relationships between nurses and doctors, because I do understand that it can be quite different. So the first thing to know and to recognize is obviously the NHS workforce is a quite multicultural workforce, and according to the most up-to-date data, there's 170,000 out of the 1.28 million staff report to be non-British nationality, and 5.5% of them are from Europe. So that should give you an idea of the fact that you're probably going to be going into a workforce that is really multicultural. Some of them speak various languages. Some of them have a good idea of different cultural or more culturally aware, but at the same time, depends on where you'll be living and where you'll be working. Some people that you'll be working with might have never traveled to the country that you're coming from, or may have never even left the UK. And so I suppose one of the really important things to recognize is to try and think of your own experiences of working with nurses in the place that you're coming from, and how you'd like to reflect and improve on those practices and improve on relationship building, because I am incredibly passionate about the fact that nurses and doctors have to work collaboratively in order to be able to protect the patients that we look after and improve patient care. So that goes back to what I was saying about our own personal experiences and having a reflective moment and thinking about what were the really bad experiences that we had when it came to our relationship building with nurses, and our bad experiences in terms of any working relationship with a multidisciplinary team. And what you'll find is in entering the NHS, we're incredibly passionate about building on those relationships and maintaining them. And as Nadia mentioned earlier, you work together quite collaboratively and you help each other get through really difficult shifts. And in particular, sometimes on the 3 a.m. night shift, where it's only yourself and perhaps your very junior team of nurses, as a senior nurse, you really rely on the doctor to help you make these decisions. And it's important to recognize that you're not alone as a doctor in making those decisions, and you're seen as a full team. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to reflect on my own bad experiences of working with doctors when they came to the emergency department, because remember that this is where I predominantly work. Although I work in the trauma service as well now, most of my experience comes from working in a small district hospital through to a big trauma centre at the Royal London Hospital. And there was two specific incidences that occurred that stick with me and have actually driven my ability to form better relationships with doctors. And the first one was working a really, really difficult night shift in the emergency department at a district hospital. The pediatric emergency department was rammed with children. I was one of 3 other nurses, pediatric nurses on shift, and we were understandably incredibly stressed. And the doctor came in to their shift. The first thing that they did was they didn't even introduce themselves as a doctor, and they went on to just look at the patients on the list, because it's all electronic, and started seeing patients and discharging them. There was no communication whatsoever. No one was talking to the nurses. No one was asking the nurses what their initial perception of the patient was, because in A&E, the nurses are the ones that see, they're kind of like the gatekeepers in A&E, and they will see the patient and sometimes even form a diagnosis in their head of what's happening, or start the process of diagnosing in their head, because, you know, they are the constant person in that department. And so they have quite a lot of extensive experience in looking after these patients. And then suddenly there was some screaming happening at the end of the room, and the doctor had basically been locked inside the room with a patient, and she couldn't get out. And no one knew her name, the doctor's name. If she had only just got in touch with us, and she'd realized that she'd just got into a room with a really, really strong, physically aggressive autistic patient. And she hadn't protected herself at all. She hadn't recognized that perhaps by communicating with us, we would have been able to protect her. And obviously she was understandably incredibly scared. You know, long story short, we were able to get her out. But what that made me realize was a lot of all of that could have been reduced had there'd been better communication with that doctor, had we understood that actually the doctor wasn't a pediatric doctor. She had no awareness of the needs of this child, and she wasn't able to risk assess or protect herself in the initial part. And also, you know, she didn't really understand the concept of speaking to the parents before, because this was her first shift in pediatric A&E. She'd been thrown in there from adults, but we knew none of this. We knew none of her insecurities. We knew none of her inabilities to look after this particular patient group, because no communication had been had with that. And just to add on to it, the other thing was some of the nurses were reluctant to help her because she wasn't engaging with us. She hadn't respected us. She hadn't really even started to communicate with us. So we probably could have avoided all of that. The patient was completely fine, by the way. And then the second situation, which I suppose is also a communication issue, was one where we had a doctor start a shift as well, see patients, and the only time they would communicate with us was to write little notes on the computer screen. So we have electronic systems. All of our patients are registered onto this electronic system, and you can see what's called like a board. And we all talk about the board and where the patients are. And she'd write little plans on the board for the patients. And then people would just erase it off. And then she'd keep writing it. But bear in mind, this person was sitting right next to the nurses, and you could just see this real breakdown in relationships. And one patient missed their treatment, and then another patient started missing treatment. And you could see that there was a real breakdown in the relationship between the doctor and the nurses, but that was actually starting to have an impact on patient care. And I do think that the way that that could have been solved was trying to figure out what was going on with that doctor, but also have a conversation with the nurses, because what was starting to happen was there was going to become a spiteful relationship between that doctor and the nurse. And actually it went on to become quite an unpleasant place to work in, because the doctors and the nurses, that doctor and the nurse just did not communicate at all. And so I suppose that just really helps, I hope, highlight a little bit around how important it is to have a relationship with your team, and recognize that the nurses and doctors relationship is quite unique, I think, in the UK. From what I've understood from other countries, is that in the UK in particular, the nursing and doctor relationship helps move that patient's journey forward. And so feel free to be there and tell your nurses and your doctors and your colleagues that you're not feeling okay, or, you know, start building on that relationship and trying to understand each other as a team, because you don't want it at the end of the day to affect patient care. So that brings me to really good experiences of working with a team. So 2 experiences again. I suppose I wanted to use bad ones and good ones so that you could just see a little bit about what I was trying to get to at the end of this talk. So the first experience, I suppose, would be a night shift again, working with a team of doctors when I was quite junior. And we got a blue call in, which is what we call an emergency call into the district hospital. They're coming in by ambulance, and the child was sitting. Now, because I'd started to build a rapport with this particular doctors group, they knew my name and they recognized the skill that I had. And so they were able to delegate roles to me that they knew that I could do, and they felt confident that I was able to do that. So that would be to gain access, because I was able to support them with that, and prepare the medications. So we knew that the child was fitting, so I started drawing up the medications for that, and I set up the stuff for IV access. And then that gave the doctor the bandwidth to be able to get this patient in. And when they came in, I was able to set up the monitoring, do all the jobs that I was asked to as the doctor was trying to get the history. Luckily, the child had stopped fitting when they arrived. And I know it's a really tiny example, but what came out of that in reflecting is that that doctor and I had a relationship because we'd had conversations, we built on that relationship. They understood my skills and they respected me as a professional. And similarly, I respected them as a professional. And so really, it just goes back to, if you think about the really bad incident that I had, is at the end of the day, we're a team. And at the end of the day, we're there to look after a patient. That is our primary focus. But also, you're spending 10 to 12 hours with these individuals. Why not build a relationship with them? They become your family. You know, get to understand them, learn their skills. And similarly, they will learn your skills. Because what you'll find is that nurses in this particular field, especially in the UK, have a variety of skills that potentially aren't developed in different countries because of the way that the nursing field progresses. So I went and chatted to my colleagues before I did this presentation just to hear what they had to say about doctors and the things that they find most important in terms of building those relationships. And these were some of the quotes that came out from interviewing my colleagues. Some of them said that they felt one of the most important things about working on the relationship between the doctors and nurses is ensuring that doctors involve them in the decision making for the patient. And that goes back to the first incident that I mentioned about that doctor not really interacting with the team or recognizing the patient's needs, and actually that it put that person at risk. And so involving the nurses in your decision making, I think would also relieve some of the stress that you have, and from listening to the previous conversation, the stresses that you guys carry on you on having that final decision on yourself. At the end of the day, you're a team, and the nurses may have had multiple conversations with the patient. And if you think about something like a safeguarding incident, what you may find is that the nurses have heard other things, or they've listened in the corridor, or they've noticed the little nuances between the siblings. So have those conversations with your team. Feel free to express your insecurities about a particular decision, because again, as I said earlier, the nurse is the constant individual in that team. They're the ones that work there all the time and know all of the different services that are available, can think of the different options that you can possibly reach out to. And at the end of the day, they've met many of you, and you're not alone. You're not the first person that they've encountered that's struggling with that issue. The other thing is listening to my concerns. So again, it goes back to that initial bad experience that I had with that doctor. I was concerned about that patient. I was really concerned about how aggressive they were. And in fact, I probably would have said that she shouldn't have gone in there on her own, but I had absolutely no idea that she was going to go and see that patient because there was zero communication with us. And I think it's really important to listen to each other just as much as the doctor should be listened to, and nurse should be also listened to in terms of their concerns. And what you'll find is that, for example, in particular, if you're working in London, something that is quite evident is young people affected by violence. And there'll be times where the young people won't want to talk to persons of authority, and they'll recognize that doctors are those people, so they might disclose things to nurses that they won't disclose necessarily to doctors. And so if a nurse comes to you and says that they're really worried about a particular person's safety, then I think it's important to listen to those concerns. It goes again with we're knowing the patient better. Sometimes the patient is a regular patient that attends the A&E, and you'll hear it. You'll hear nurses say, oh, I know him. Oh yeah, he was here last night. Or, you know, oh, he's a regular. We see him all the time. And something that was really poignant to me was the fact of the overlap of traditional roles. What you'll find here in the UK is that there's been a real effort in developing the nurse role. And nurses in the department, especially in hospitals, have varying roles. And in fact, you might have a really junior nurse who may be wearing the same colored scrub as a doctor. Sorry? What you might find is that junior nurses might look like a doctor, but actually they don't have the same experiences. And similarly, a senior nurse may have had 20 years experience in the emergency department, but also is able to prescribe medication, is able to do particular procedures. And so there's a real overlap in terms of the old traditional roles and the new traditional roles of nursing. What you also may find, which I don't know if this is the case everywhere else, but in the UK, you have nurse specialists, and there'll be specialists in those particular areas. You'll have nurses who are advanced clinical practitioners who are seen and run or work at the same level as a junior doctor. And you have nurse consultants, similarly to doctor consultants. And so that goes back to my original point about understanding your team, recognizing their skills, recognizing their skill set and their strengths. And something that I've learned from my experience of working with London's Air Ambulance is at the beginning of a shift, get to know the team that you're working with, because this might be a new team, and get to know what skills that they're able to provide for the day. It might be that you'll find that someone is particularly good at oncology or particularly good at dealing with safeguarding. And those skills you can really use to be able to support you in your day-to-day. The last thing that everyone says they were particularly passionate about is if you're starting in an area, or if you're starting in the ED or in the pediatric department, become familiar with guidelines and protocols. Nurses are obsessed with guidelines and protocols, and we will almost drill it into you that you need to know about it. So if you don't know where it is, if you don't know them off by heart, just know where you can access them, because there's always a pathway set in stone about how things should be done, when we should be discharging patients, when they should be admitted, what services we need to be accessing. But yet again, remember, the nurses are there to support you. So this goes, hopefully I've been able to complete a full circle and get you to understand that you're not alone. The nurses are there to support you completely. We're here to help you make decisions, and sometimes we'll guide you away from a bad decision. I think that my relationships that I've built in emergency department and different areas of the hospital have been like true relationships that I can trust, and they're people that I can confide in. There'll be times where you guys will be working really, really tough shifts, and actually at the end of the day, the only one that understands what you've seen and what you've been through is the doctor or the nurse that you've built that relationship with. And I think that's completely okay. We're here to support each other. Don't feel alone. Don't be scared. Again, nurses have seen it all, and we've been through it multiple times. I just wanted to briefly mention the conflict with parents and patients. What I've noticed a lot in my career is that, I don't know if it's in your training or what it is, but I feel like sometimes doctors think they have to deal with things completely on their own. And what I would recommend is it goes back to that relationship. If you feel that something is escalating, bring in a colleague, bring in a nurse, because actually we're quite experienced in de-escalating that situation. I have small techniques that I use. I always get the patients to sit down. We all sit down, and I just feel like that just makes everyone calmer. Sometimes I bring them into a room just to separate them from, different patients so that there's no escalation, because sometimes what you find is that they sort of feed off of each other. But I wouldn't be able to do that did I not have the comfort or the support of my doctor colleagues, because they are also there to back you up. So just remember, you're a team. And the last thing to de-escalate, goes on to my de-escalation of conflict with patients, is knowing about the play team. So not everywhere has this service, but it is a particularly unique service. And if they do, try and find out when you start in your new job if they do. So the play team will be a group of sometimes youth workers, so individuals who are particularly interested in young people aged between 11 and 18 years old. But mostly there will be individuals who have an expertise in distraction for the younger age group. And what they will do is they are there primarily to distract the patient. So for example, in a resus call, when a child gets wheeled into the resus room with multiple people staring at them, really loud noises, they can be really distressed. It can be quite hard for you as the doctor and the nurse to decipher between distress and head injury symptoms, for example. So the play team will be able to support you in that. Sometimes they bring in different toys, sometimes they bring in some different interactive methods so that they can distract the child fully. And similarly, for me, I use them all the time for cannulation. So something that we're quite passionate about in this country is you don't just cannulate and keep cannulating and keep going for the line. We have a 3-step rule. So you can try twice and 3 times, but then you'll go to IO insertion. But within those times, if you can, involve the play team as much as possible, because we're quite passionate about reducing the traumatic impact on any of our pediatric patients and even the adolescent patient group. Use them for other things like procedures that we need to do. So a procedure that we use and we do quite frequently is we use ketamine to do sedations for deep lacerations to the forehead or lacerations across the body that need a quick, rapid closure. Or in order to do the cannulation insertion, we use the play team to distract the child. And as a team, we work together, we coordinate that care to be able to make it a really smooth transition for that child, and it doesn't influence the sedation period. And that's it. I'm really sorry that it's short, but as Nadia mentioned, I'm on shift and have quite a lot of trauma patients that I need to see. But I hope that it's given you a small example, a small snippet of, and reassured you in your introduction to the NHS and welcoming you into the team. And I hope that you guys all form great relationships with your nurses, because we are a fantastic but crazy bunch. If there's any questions, let me know.
You definitely are a fantastic bunch, Anna, and thank you so much for coming. And I can hear people knocking on the door for you at RLH there. Thank you so much. Anna tells me when I'm cannulating, obviously we have that tendency to keep going and you get into, and she's like, Nadia, one more go, that's it. So, everyone on the chat is saying how amazing and how useful your talk has been. I can't see any questions there yet, but please put them in the chat and we will forward them to Anna. And I'm mindful that you're on shift. Thank you so much for making the time for us. We're going to play your stance video to make people aware of your amazing work. And
thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And don't be offended if the nurses advise you. It's just because they care.
Yes. And you will learn loads from the nurses.
Bye.
Bye, Anna. Thank you.
Violence has become totally normalized within young people now. It is normal to be stabbed. And that's why I want healthcare professionals to talk to young people and have an opportunity to learn from them, because it feels like we've completely disconnected. Your stance is an opportunity for young people to learn a skill, but it's also an opportunity for healthcare professionals to connect with young people through our workshops by teaching a skill and learning about the young person's experience to be able to inform them on how best to treat them when seeing them in practice, but also to reinvigorate the compassion for these young people.
I wanted to nominate Anna because she has spent so much time, so much of her own time. She spent a lot of her own money. She was so passionate about this project, and that's why, after 2 years, she's got 150 volunteers.
Anna's vision has kept me with your stance for this long whilst I'm working full time, and I've kind of got more involved rather than less involved.
Someone like Anna, who is as strong an advocate as she is, reminds doctors and nurses why they're there, what they're doing that job for, who they're really looking out for, and the wider value of the work they're doing.
It's such a positive experience, and it opens your eyes and your experience and understanding of the community, and that informs how we manage our next patients who come into our emergency department.
Your Stance was founded and set up by myself in 2018. It came really from a sense of helplessness in my inability to support young people who had been affected by serious youth violence. Working in a major trauma centre, we received a 17-year-old young male who came to A&E, and he had been stabbed in the leg. Unfortunately, that young person did die, and they died in theatre. We don't know, but there is a chance that had his friends known what to do and put pressure on the wound, perhaps he would still be alive. And so that idea of being able to provide this basic knowledge to young people and empowering them with that knowledge so that they can be leaders in their own community really inspired me.
Honor is going out, literally going to young people, teaching them, talking to them, getting to know them, trying to understand them, and then equipping them with the skills that they need to save somebody's life.
Just didn't feel like my 10 minutes that I had with these patients was sufficient. I didn't know what else I could really do to help. And on top of that, I was noticing a real breakdown in compassion for these young people, seeing them as just a number as opposed to patients that were, you know, in a really difficult situation, especially socially and economically.
We care. We want to know about their backgrounds. We want to help them. We're not just people in uniforms that are judging them. If she was Nurse of the Year, yeah, I think she'll probably keel over.
I mean, of course, if I was Nurse of the Year, that would be incredible. Yeah, definitely would be absolutely amazing.
Very inspiring video, I must say, and Anna is amazing to work with. And I do show there in that video. We went and volunteered once with her. It was amazing. Over to you, Mega.
So now we are going to see some more videos, which will be about handover. I think Bijan has already covered a bit of handover. We will be showing you some videos of the handover, and we want this session to be very interactive. So you can unmute yourself and tell us what you find in those videos, what was helpful and what was not helpful with those videos. And we'll be chatting in between while we are looking at the videos. Can we get the videos shared, Nadia? You're muted, Nadia. Well, guys, you'll be spotting some of us in those videos as well.
Okay, apologies, I'm not very tech savvy, as you can see, but here we go. Okay. Apologies again for my slow technical skills. Here we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So in bed 1, we've got a patient, Rose Carter. I'm sorry, the list isn't updated. I don't have the MRN.